I don't want to bring this to my friends yet cause it would sour their relationship with him if we stayed together. Since we've been together so long, the majority of our friends are mutual. We've been together since we were 22. When he was 26, his mum died suddenly. They were extremely close and spoke every day. She was a real matriarch of their family and it was incredibly hard on him. During the first year, I supported his grieving. I got him to go to grief counseling and helped him to get back into normal life afterwards. We stopped having regular sex because of the grieving and also we moved back into my parents for 6 months to save some money, but did not ever go long periods without it. About 18 months after her death we quit our jobs and went traveling together for an unknown extended period which ended up being 10 months. It had always been a dream of mine to do this kind of trip. I was ecstatic that it was actually happening and that I got to do it with my best friend. He confessed to me, it turned out about 6 months in, after we'd been having arguments almost every day of the trip, that he'd totally hidden from me the depths of his depression and grief. He was suicidal and he agreed to go on this trip to run away from his feelings. I was livid. He'd ruined my life dream. It had been mostly a horrible experience up to that point as he resisted any suggestions I made and we fought every day about him not wanting to do stuff and leaving me to go out on my own. He is an excellent liar and very good at appearing fine, which is why I hadn't spotted it before. In social outings and at home, he'd seemed to be dealing well with his grief. If he'd been honest with me, I would have insisted he get some help, go on antidepressants and we delay the trip. I would have loved to been given the choice. Anyway, fast forward to yesterday. In an emotional conversation about our future he confessed he'd cheated on me during that trip. We started in Australia. We went to my cousin's wedding with my whole family. We spent 3 weeks in Australia with them, and then they left. We traveled around for a few weeks visiting friends, and then ended up back at my aunt and uncle's place for our final few weeks in Australia before moving on. This was less than 1.5 months into the 10-month trip. I suggested to my BF that he go to Bali by himself for 2 weeks while I stayed with my family. He'd never done any kind of travel like what we were about to embark on, where you move around a lot and there's a lot of unpredictability with when you will be. I knew he would struggle with this, so I sent him off to Bali to have an experience doing it solo. This was where he cheated on me. Less than a quarter of the way through our trip, I asked him for all the details, and it's so much worse than that. They were in the Gili Islands, which I went to with my BF 2 years earlier, and we'd had a great holiday. He'd told her he had a GF and they still did it. Neither of them were drunk or high. And also, they'd met in a hostel the previous night and deliberately booked a room with a double bed in another hotel for the next night, in order to have the opportunity. Oh, even worse, it had a pull-out bed and they'd booked it as a 3 with another guy and split it to make it cheaper. And they had sex outside on grass in the hotel grounds because the guy was in the room at the time. Oh, and even worse, she apparently sucked his dick again the morning after. So I immediately felt awful. Doesn't really compute here. He let her do that again in the morning. He said it was because he didn't feel connected to me and we hadn't had much sex recently. I will again remind you, he was grieving at the time a very serious death, and we'd been living at my parents' the last 6 months before leaving, which is not a sexy place. He didn't feel connected because he'd shut himself off and not told me how depressed he was getting and hidden with this lies and acting fine. I lived with him, and I didn't see anything concerning. I would not have gone on an extended trip with someone I felt needed support. I feel fully justified here in saying I had no part in why he felt that way. It was nothing I did or said or changed. I am beyond devastated by this news. I thought he would never cheat because he'd feel too guilty. Turned out he did cheat and felt guilty but instead decided to just completely hide it from me. Oh, one more thing. The only other person he's told is our mutual friend, who he told the day after, and told him to either tell me immediately or never tell me, and who also I spent 3 weeks with about 3 months later on the USA part of our trip. I spent 3 weeks with the guy, and he's known this entire last 6 years of our friendship. I feel so yucky that one of my friends knew all that about my boyfriend and just hung out with me knowing that. I really thought I'd found an exception to what the general assumption seemed to be of men are cheating trash. So many of our arguments and his behavior make sense now with him carrying around this guilt the whole time during the last 6 years. Has anyone forgiven cheating before? What about it made you forgive? I need to know if this is something I can move past. I'm hurt that she lied to me when I asked her the first time, cause it feel like she don't even respect me enough to tell me. Is that just me? And instead of her coming clean, she was gonna take this to her grave, and I just don't know how she can sleep at night knowing this. And if it wasn't for the dude GF at the time, I would be blind from this today, which I think I got so lucky that I avoided a whole mess. Is that just me?